Okay, here we go. We've already looked at the agenda for today, so we are going to hop right in to CNN 10 and our main man, Carl.
This is 10 minutes of International News Explained, aka CNN 10. My name is Carl Azus. We're happy you're with us. The United States military announced on Tuesday that thousands of American troops are coming home from Afghanistan and Iraq. The American military has been involved in Afghanistan since 2001 when it led an international force to knock the ruling Taliban group out of power. The Taliban were sheltering al-Qaeda terrorists who were responsible for the September 11th, 2001 terrorist attacks on the United States. The U.S. military has been involved in Iraq since 2003, when it led an international force to knock Iraqi President Saddam Hussein out of power. The American government accused him of sheltering terrorists as well, in addition to building illegal weapons of mass destruction, though American forces did not find those weapons after the conflict began. The numbers of U.S. servicemen and women in Iraq and Afghanistan have fluctuated over the years. Currently, there are about 4,500 American troops in Afghanistan and 3,000 in Iraq. The Trump administration plans to withdraw around 2,000 from Afghanistan and 500 from Iraq in the weeks ahead, leaving about 2,500 forces in each country. A senior U.S. defense official says the reduction in forces is consistent with President Trump's promise to bring troops home from the two nations. And the acting U.S. Secretary of Defense says America is on the verge of defeating the al-Qaeda terrorist group. But critics of the withdrawal, including some Republican lawmakers, say it's not the right time to reduce U.S. troop numbers in these countries and that the decision would come as good news to terrorist groups. The withdrawal of many American troops is expected to be completed by January 15th of next year. When you think about it, the poet Dylan Thomas is kind of relevant to our next story. Rage, rage against the dying of the light could serve as a piece of advice from psychologists when it comes to warding off the winter blues. Seasonal affective disorder can coincide with the short winter days, and if that time of year gets you down, there are a few pieces of advice in a new paper published in the International Journal of Well-Being. 1. Get outside. A number of studies have shown that people who spend at least 2 hours per week in the great outdoors are healthier and happier. 2. Change your mindset. Find things about winter you look forward to. If you're stuck indoors, it might be a cup of hot chocolate while watching It's a Wonderful Life. Activities you can positively associate with winter can reportedly improve your outlook. Dr. Sanjay Gupta has some more info and advice when it comes to seasonal affective disorder.
At least 12 million Americans suffer from something known as seasonal affective disorder, or SAD. Numbers probably even higher than that. Longer nights, shorter days. All of that leads to a chemical imbalance in the brain. What happens is your serotonin levels are down, and melatonin, which makes you sleepy, that's up. Does it make sense? Symptoms can be mild or severe. You can get fatigue, lack of energy, oversleeping, difficulty concentrating, and also cravings for food that cause weight gain. That probably sounds familiar as well. Diet and exercise can always help. Also, get outside as much as you can. You can also get a specialty designed light box. You just sit there and stare at it for a while each day, or at least put it on your desk. The point is you can get a boost of more natural light. Worst case, some doctors may recommend antidepressants or psychotherapy to help you get through this. Another tidbit, find things that bring you joy. Open up the blinds in your house, play some of your favorite music, and be with your family. Laughter and togetherness are always great therapy for the winter blues.
10-second trivia. Which of these military leaders founded a famous city in Egypt? William the Conqueror, Genghis Khan, Alexander the Great, or Attila the Hun? It was in the year 332 BC that Alexandria, Egypt was founded by Alexander the Great. And it was sometime around the year 500 BC that dozens of coffins were buried around the Egyptian capital of Cairo, and they were recently unearthed in mint condition from a large burial ground. Egyptian authorities say they're in such good shape because they belong to people who were, quote, a little bit rich. At least one of them contained a mummy, which officials are x-raying to try to find out the person's gender and age at the time of death. The find of more than 100 ancient coffins also contained 40 statues and other artifacts. They'll be sent to museums throughout Egypt. Announcements of more discoveries from this area are expected in the weeks ahead. The Egyptian government hopes finds like this will attract more tourists to the country, where political instability, terrorism, and now the coronavirus pandemic have hurt that industry. The issue of overfishing is our next topic. It's taking fish out of the oceans faster than they can replenish their numbers naturally. Environmentalists say this can damage the entire marine ecosystem. There are several reasons this happens. With a growing global population, there's a growing demand for seafood. The commercial fishing industry is expanding and many people rely on it for their livelihoods, but environmentalists say there are more commercial fishermen and women than the world needs. Some people fish illegally or don't report everything they catch, and critics say governments contribute to overfishing by paying commercial fishermen to help with their businesses. There are rules in place around the world that aim to prevent overfishing. One main way this is done is by putting limits on what people can catch. Some fishermen oppose this, saying regulations make their jobs harder and limits make it harder for them to earn a living. But for those who support overfishing regulations, there's a new tool available that can help them keep track of their catch.
Every day, thousands of fishing trawlers take to our seas, releasing miles and miles of nets to catch fish. But over the last few decades, this led to overfishing, dramatically depleting the seas of vital fish stocks. Now, smart technology offers hope to tackle overfishing and illegal catches.
We need to find a way to harvest the fish sustainably.
In the Sintef Ocean Laboratory in Trondheim, Norway, that cutting-edge technology is being developed. An indoor pool that simulates an ocean basin, laser scanners that analyze fish stocks, and 3D visualization techniques that reproduce the seabed are being used to lead the fight against overfishing.
We want to, first of all, make sure that we have a way of finding out how much fish is in the ocean, how much can we harvest within sustainable limits.
According to the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization, 34.2% of the world's fish stocks were overfished in 2017. Sintef Ocean believes its catch scanner technology can address that.
It's a laser and a 3D camera system and artificial intelligence to do the analysis. If you have a fish, like this plastic fish, and you send it through the scanner, then it builds up a 3D image and a color image at the same time. And this is used by artificial intelligence to estimate the weight and the species. This then allows us to know exactly how much fish we are fishing so that we can adjust the quotas appropriately.
These new smart devices will be tested by some of Europe's fishing industry. If successful, the hope is for a widespread adoption.
It's really important to understand that some of these technologies can be very expensive to put on board fishing vessels. So in order for the fishers to want to have them on board, they need to see the benefit of this. We'll be better able to assess the stocks in general. We'll be able to set regulations that are realistic. And we'll be able to have a better understanding of how sustainable we really are.
This larger research project, known as SmartFish H 2020, is being funded by the European Union in an effort to modernize the industry and eliminate overfishing.
What we want to see happen is that the EU chooses to install these technologies on board fishing vessels. That is the main goal of this.
With the global fish demand expected to increase in the years to come, the adoption of smart tech could be crucial to safeguarding the ocean's fish stocks.
The 4 astronauts on the latest space mission have arrived at the International Space Station, and there was a stowaway with them. The force was too strong to leave Baby Yoda behind, even though he didn't buy a $55 million seat. Is there a purpose for a plush doll on a trip that's not to a galaxy far, far away? Possibly. Aboard the launch vehicle, a floating Yoda could show them this is the way to know when they've left the pull of gravity. So he does kind of have a Jabba, even if it's just Boba Fetting around in space until they Lando Chew back on Earth. No one's going to look at him and say, Yoda man, but he's not flying Han Solo, and he won't cause any general grievances while he's up there, so the astronauts seem pretty stoked to have him while they Skywalker around this winter. I'm Carl Azus. Jedi am out of time, so we'll see you later. Want to give a shout out to Valley View High School. It's in Germantown, Ohio, for subscribing and leaving a comment on our YouTube channel. May the force be with you too, if you do the same.
Ooh, Puerto Vallarta, Mexico. Have you been there? It's a big vacation spot to go to. That'd be kind of nice to go to. Although, hey, it's pretty sunny outside today. Speaking of outside, hey, as we're at home with this virtual learning stuff, there's a piece on here. It's why I wanted to watch this episode. Part of the reason I want to watch this episode, because it suggests from that doctor that they interviewed that people are happier. You're more motivated to do things. You enjoy life more, studies show, when you're able to get outside and hike around a little bit or go for a walk or just get some fresh air. So I highly encourage you guys that as you are managing your time throughout the next couple of weeks here, that you try your best to get outside, get some fresh air. I think you'll find that you are able to manage this being at home and doing virtual learning much easier if you're able to do that. So I encourage you guys to do that. All right. Hey, moving on here. We need to check your homework a little bit. And the homework was that compromise SOB, which stood for, or excuse me, SOP, which stood for separation of powers, and then CB, checks and balances. If you guys, most of you turned that in because that was like your exit from class the other day. So I have returned all those to you so that you can mark it up and edit it as you see fit. But we are going to go through that here together just for a few minutes to make sure we're on the same page. I'll give you about 30 seconds here to pull that up. 30, 29, 28, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right, we're ready to go. So the first couple of things that we want to talk about in terms of the compromises. We've talked about a few of the compromises, and the first one we want to talk about is that great compromise. And to define some things that dealt with that, first of all, we wanted to look at the definition of what bicameral and unicameral mean. Bicameral and unicameral are both words that derive from the Latin language. So you're going to get a little Latin lesson here today too as well. So bicameral means having two houses. Bi meaning two, like a bicycle has two wheels to it. And cameral is a word from Latin that means like houses or rooms. So we have two rooms, two houses. Unicameral means having one house. Uni meaning one. If you have a unicycle, right? You have a kind of a machine, whatever you want to call it, with only one wheel. Uni, one. Miles, you gotta get on your Zoom, buddy. Sorry, every once in a while I got to direct traffic here for my kids that are learning at home today. Number two, what question was resolved with the Great Compromise? Well, that's how the lawmaking body of our government would be determined by state population, or excuse me, would be set up. That's our legislative branch, because the legislative branch is in charge of making the laws. So for number three, as they were trying to decide how they were going to set up that legislative branch, and when I say they, remember we're talking about those founding fathers back in 1789 when they're writing the Constitution. They came up with, first of all, the delegates or the founding fathers that are there from some of the larger states, Virginia in particular, in terms of population. They came up with that Virginia plan. The number of members would be determined by state populations. That's how they felt the legislative branch would be put together, should be put together. Now, the smaller states like New Jersey and a few other states thought, no. We're not going to have equal representation then. We're going to get trampled all over then in the legislative branch. So they came up with their own plan, the New Jersey plan, where each state, they said, should have the same number of representatives or votes. So they wanted equal representation. Well, so now we've got two opposing things that are kind of butting heads a little bit. They don't agree with each other. So they got to come up with a compromise. And again, as they review, fill in the information here, the Virginia plan, how many houses? 2. Number of congressmen determined by the population. The New Jersey plan, how many houses? 1. Number of congressmen determined by all states get equal. So they came up with that great compromise. It's also known as the Connecticut Compromise, but we're going to call it the Great Compromise. That's how most people know it by. And it still has lasted through today. So they ended up setting up our legislative branch with the first house being the House of Representatives, and that's kind of referred to as the lower house, where each state gets representation based on population. So there is where the Virginia plan sets in. The larger states have more people in the House of Representatives. It's still the same case today. Then we have the second house, the Senate, would be set up with each state getting equal representation, which is what we have today still. We call it the upper house, where each state gets 2. Number 7, circle the correct ending to each statement. A, representatives in the House are based on population, and B, senators in the Senate are based on equality. So every group, every state gets the same. Alrighty. Next up, define separation of powers. Powers being separated equally among the 3 branches. And then checks and balances. Each branch has different responsibilities and can check the other 2. This is set up because back when we broke away from Great Britain, we were sick and tired of one part of a government, so the king from England, having too much power. We wanted it to be separated out so that they could, power is more spread out. Not one person or one group of people has too much power. And then how are those checks and balances going to work? Well, they gave specific jobs within our federal government to the 3 branches. So the legislative branch, which again, remember that's Congress, which is made up of the House of Representatives and the Senate, they make the laws. The people, our senators and our representatives, they are the ones that are allowed to make laws for our federal government. The executive branch, which is basically the president and then all of his staff, which actually is our largest branch of government. We'll discuss that more in our next unit of study when we talk about the 3 branches of government. But the president and the executive branch, their job is to then take the laws that the legislative branch has created and enforce them, make sure that they are being followed. And then lastly, the judicial branch, which is headed by the Supreme Court, yet there are lower levels as well throughout our country. But the Supreme Court is that top court in our land. Their job is to interpret laws. So the laws are made by the legislative branch. They're supposed to be enforced and made sure that they're being followed by the executive branch. And if there's a question about what a law means, or if someone is following the law or not, that's what the judicial branch's job is. Okay, moving on. Number 2, name 3 ways in which the powers of the United States are divided. Uh-oh, I forgot to fill that one in. I didn't put the cheese on the cheeseburger. My fault. The 3 ways powers, we pretty much go back to that first part. They're divided through separation of power, checks and balances, and then the fact that each of those 3 branches of government has a different job. Again, the legislative branch makes the laws, executive branch enforces the laws, judicial branch interprets the laws. Why are the powers separated? Well, they're separated so that not one person or group or branch of government had too much power or control. 4, what is the job of the legislative branch? We just said that their job is to make the laws. Number 5, what is the job of the executive branch? That's to enforce the laws. And lastly, number 6, what is the job of the judicial branch? That is to interpret the laws. And then in terms of checks and balances, it's set up so that each branch of government has the ability to check the other 2 branches of government, or the other 2 branches of government have the ability to check. And when I say check, I mean stop them from doing something, basically. They can stop the other 2 branches of government from doing something. So for number 7, what 2 branches are checked by the legislative branch? The legislative branch can check the executive and the judicial branch. Number 8, what 2 branches are checked by the executive branch? Well, the executive branch has the ability to check the judicial and the legislative branch. And lastly, number 9, what 2 branches are checked by the judicial branch? That'd be the executive and the legislative branch. We're going to get into those checks and balances a lot more when we talk about the 3 different branches of government in our next unit, like I said. All right, so you can go ahead and resubmit that to me so that I can get credit, or give credit where credit is due. All right, next up, we are moving onwards and upwards. So we've now talked about the Declaration of Independence, Articles of Confederation, and now we're into the Constitution. We've covered some of the first part of the Constitution, but now we want to get into the Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments that are put into the Constitution. And it's sort of they're put into the Constitution almost as a compromise again. We've got kind of two groups of people, of delegates, that are the founding fathers at the Constitutional Convention. Some of them fall underneath the category of what we refer to as Federalists. Remember, our federal government is our national government, and the Federalists were in favor of a stronger federal government, more powerful federal government. The Anti-Federalists were another group of the gentlemen at the Constitutional Convention that were anti, so against the Federalists. They were against a large, big, strong national government. So they were saying, hey, we're not going to sign this Constitution unless there are some protections from our big, strong federal national government. And that is where we got the 10 amendments, the first 10 amendments, the Bill of Rights. Because basically what they are, as we're going to listen to here for a few minutes, is protections for us as individual citizens, and also, in a sense, for the states, so that the states aren't totally, completely controlled by the big federal government. So, like I said, we're going to watch 2 clips here about those, and then we will move on. Here we go.
Amendments to the Constitution.
Let's start this over.
Know it today were the first 10 amendments to the Constitution. And these amendments guaranteed individual liberty to make sure that citizens had a stated expectation for what the government could or could not do to them. And you can kind of see here in many of these rights the legacy of the Revolutionary War and the kinds of government abuses that citizens in the colonies had feared. Now, I'm going to go over these very quickly. We'll spend a lot more time in other videos talking more about these amendments, but I want to give you an overall sense of what they're driving at. Now, the first 4 amendments guarantee individual liberties. These are freedom of religion, speech, press, assembly, freedom to ask the government for redress of grievances or to deal with a problem that the government may have caused in your life, the right to bear arms and assemble militias. State and local militias had made the Revolutionary War a success for the United States. A ban on quartering soldiers in homes. Recall that the Quartering Act, when the British government said that the colonies had to put up soldiers in their homes, was a major driver of revolution. And a ban on unreasonable search and seizure. That is, it would be necessary for the government to get a warrant to enter your home or to search your belongings. The next 4 amendments in the Bill of Rights deal with protections for people accused of crimes. And again, you see the legacy of the Revolutionary War in the idea that the crown had had too much power to persecute individuals. So this includes things like the right to due process, that is, to make sure that all the steps of following the law are taken. A ban on being tried twice for the same crime. Rights to a speedy and public trial, a jury of your peers, to even have a jury in cases that don't have to do with violent crimes, but rather civil disputes. And a ban on excessive bail and cruel and unusual punishment. Basically, this is a guarantee that the government will respect the rights of individuals. Now, one of the arguments made against including a Bill of Rights in the Constitution was that listing out those rights might then mean that they were the only rights, and that by listing out these rights in particular, they might be forfeiting their liberties in other ways. So the 9th and 10th Amendments attempt to deal with that worry. They say in the 9th Amendment, any right that isn't listed here is still retained by the people. So this is not an exhaustive list. This is not the complete list of all the rights retained by the people. And the 10th Amendment is slightly different, but kind of on the same line. They say that if this Constitution has not delegated a right directly to the federal government, then that right is reserved to the states or the people. So the federal government can only do the things that are listed in this Constitution. It is a limited government, limited by this document. On the other hand, the rights of the people are unlimited. So if the Constitution doesn't say that the federal government can do it, that's then a right of the states or the people.
Okay, so as it just mentioned there, like those first 8 are all civil rights or civil liberties that we have as protections for us. But then the anti-federalists who wanted those in there, they were also a little bit concerned that then it could be interpreted that those are the only rights people have. So they got number 9, as it just said there, it's not an exhaustive list. Exhaustive, like that's not the only thing on there. So the 9th Amendment says, or basically is an announcement saying those first 8 amendments are rights that we have or protections from the government. But on the flip side, like those aren't the only things that we are protected from the government. There is other stuff, but we can't possibly list every single protection that we need from the government in this, because that would be like a 1,000-page document. And then number 10 is that protection that the states now have from the federal government. Okay, it says the federal government can only do what we say it can. So if it's written in the Constitution and the power, whatever power that might be, is given to the federal government, then that's it. That's the federal government's right. But if it's not written in the Constitution, I think I've brought up the fact that the word education is never once mentioned in the Constitution. So that according to the 10th Amendment, then that gives the states the rights to decide upon or about how education is going to be done in their particular state. So again, it allows for some protections, and I want to say the Bill of Rights, first 10 amendments, allow for some protections from the government for us as individuals, but also for the states as well. All right, perfect. Okay, one more clip here.
It's hard to think of that day.
I'll get rid of this.
We didn't know this would be coming.
Here we go.
Hi, I'm Craig, and this is Crash Course Government and Politics, and today we're finally, at long last, moving on from the structures and branches of government and onto the structures and branches of trees. This is a nature show now. Okay, we're not moving on completely because we're still talking about courts, but today we'll be discussing actual court decisions and the kinds of things that courts rule on rather than how they do it. That's right, we're moving on to civil rights and civil liberties. Okay, first I want to talk about something that I find confusing, the difference between civil rights and civil liberties. Usually in America we use the terms interchangeably, which adds to the confusion, but lawyers and political scientists draw a distinction, so you should know about it. Then you can go back to calling civil liberties rights and civil rights liberties, and most people won't care. But I'll care. I'll be disappointed in you. So civil liberties are limitations placed on the government. Basically, there are things the government can't do that might interfere with your personal freedom. Civil rights are curbs on the power of majorities to make decisions that would benefit some at the expense of others. Basically, civil rights are guarantees of equal citizenship, and they mean that citizens are protected from discrimination by majorities. Take, for example, same-sex marriage. You could think of it as a liberty, except that not everyone is free to marry at any given time. 6-year-olds can't get married, and you can't marry your sibling. But same-sex marriage is a civil rights issue because in the states that don't allow it, the majority of voters is denying something to a minority, creating inequality in the way that the laws work. Now, just to make things more confusing, lawyers often talk about the difference between substantive and procedural liberties, but they usually call them rights instead of liberties. It's a lawyer, Eagle. Illegal eagle. Substantive liberties are limits on what the government can do. For example, the First Amendment says that Congress shall make no law establishing religion. So this means that they cannot create a national church or declare that Christianity or Islam or Hinduism is the official religion of the U.S. Procedural liberties are limits on how the government can act. For example, in America, in courtroom dramas, there's a presumption that someone is innocent until proven guilty. This presumption means that in criminal cases, juries and judges have to act as though the accused is innocent until the prosecution convinces them otherwise. If they are not convinced, the accused person doesn't go to prison. So now that we understand the difference between civil rights and civil liberties perfectly because of my amazing explanation, let's focus on the liberties and try to figure out what they are and where they come from, with some help from Thought Bubble. So civil liberties are contained in the incredibly unhelpfully named Bill of Rights, which isn't even called that in the Constitution. It's just the name we give to the first 10 amendments. The 9th Amendment is included to remind us that the list of liberties and or rights in the other amendments isn't exhaustive. There might be other rights out there, but the Constitution doesn't specifically say what they are. Thanks, Constitution. In some cases, it's pretty clear. The First Amendment, for example, says that Congress shall make no law respecting the establishment of religion or abridging the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press, or to assemble or to infringe the right to petition the government for redress of grievances. Pretty straightforward. But other cases are not so clear. The Second Amendment says the right to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed, but it doesn't say by whom. Same thing with the Fifth Amendment guarantees against self-incrimination. Could Congress force you to incriminate yourself? How would they do that? And the Eighth Amendment prohibits cruel and unusual punishments, like presumably shock pens. But it doesn't say who is forbidden from cruelly and unusually punishing. My mom wasn't forbidden from keeping me from playing video games. As usual, we might expect the Supreme Court to sort out this mess, but initially they were no help at all. In a case you've probably never heard of called Barron versus Baltimore, decided in 1833, the court said that the Bill of Rights applied to the national, meaning federal government, not to the states. They said that every American has dual citizenship, but not the good kind. They meant that you are a citizen of the U.S. and of the state in which you reside, and basically that the Constitution only protected you from the federal government. In other words, if the state of Indiana wanted to punish me cruelly or unusually, they could. Thanks, Thought Bubble. So Barron versus Baltimore left Americans in a bit of a civil liberties pickle. And not the good kind of pickle. They were protected from the national government doing terrible things like quartering troops in their homes, but not from the state doing the same thing. And since the state was close to home and the national government was far away and compared with today, tiny and weak, these protections were pretty weak sauce. So what happened to change this? I hope something, because I like a zesty government sauce. The 14th Amendment and the Supreme Court happened. After the Civil War, as part of Reconstruction, the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments were added to the Constitution. Of these, the 14th is the most important, probably the most important of all amendments. What does it say? Well, the first section, which is the one that really matters, and I'm not going to read the whole thing, okay? It reads, "All persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside. No state shall make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privileges or immunities of citizens of the United States. Nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. Nor deny any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws." What this means is that the federal government's like, listen, states, you can't be dumb. Just stop it. Okay, we're all in this together, all right? It means states can't deny equal protection, civil rights, or due process, which in this case encompasses civil liberties. This, in theory, makes it impossible for states to infringe upon the liberties in the Bill of Rights. But the legal system being what it is, it's not quite that simple. Did you think it'd be simple? The Supreme Court could have just ruled that all the rights and liberties in the Bill of Rights applied to the states, which seems to be what the 14th Amendment implies, but they didn't. Instead, they ruled that each of the rights or liberties had to be incorporated against the states on a case-by-case basis. This is a concept called selective incorporation, and it supposedly reserves more power to the states. What it really means is that when people felt that the states were violating their liberties, they had to go to the Supreme Court, which by now has incorporated almost every clause in the Bill of Rights against the states. You want examples? We got them. In the famous case of Gitlow versus New York, the court ruled that the First Amendment protection of freedom of speech could not be violated by a state. In this case, it was New York, but once a liberty is incorporated against one state, it's incorporated against all of them. In Mapp versus Ohio, the court ruled that states couldn't use evidence gathered from warrantless searches. In Benton versus Maryland, the right against double jeopardy, being tried for the same crime twice, was incorporated against the states. By now, almost all the rights and liberties mentioned in the first 10 amendments have been incorporated against the states. This means that individuals are protected from all their governments taking away their liberties. And that's a good thing. I loves my liberties. So we'll be talking about civil rights and civil liberties for a number of episodes, and this topic, while confusing, can be lots of fun. We might play liberties bingo, or civil rights kickball. I don't know what those things are, but they sound like fun. The main thing to remember is that going all the way back to the framers, Americans have been concerned about a too powerful government taking away citizens' freedoms. Yes, these liberties apply mostly to citizens, although some do apply to non-citizens too. In order to put limits on government, the Bill of Rights was added to the Constitution in 1789, but this didn't mean that those limits applied to the states, probably because the founders expected states to be the main protectors of rights. And in fact, many state constitutions have provisions that copy or in some ways go beyond what's in the U.S. Constitution. Only after the 14th Amendment was passed following the Civil War did the national government get around to addressing this issue of states denying people's liberties. Even then, it took numerous court cases for us to get to the point that most of the liberties that we assume cannot be taken away by the government have actually been guaranteed through the process of selective incorporation. It's taken a long time to get where we are, and there's still a long way to go. Protecting civil liberties requires vigilant citizens to be aware of the ways their government is overstepping its bounds. But that's only half the equation. It's also vital that our majority pay attention to the civil rights of others, and that we ensure that everyone is afforded the same protections and benefits promised by our system of law. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time. Crash Course Government and Politics is produced in association with PBS Digital Studios. Support for Crash Course U.S. Government comes from...
Okay, so again, a little bit more in depth into why those civil liberties and civil rights were important to be protected by the Bill of Rights. But if you ever hear people talking about, well, my civil rights are being trampled on, or my civil liberties, that's what we're referring to is some of these things in the Bill of Rights, basically. Those freedoms that we are supposed to have had or are supposed to have now based on the Bill of Rights and when they were set up. Okay, here's where we are going to get rolling here with some work. In a minute, you will find that I will have posted on there your assignment for today. And what it is this Bill of Rights guided reading. Now, guided notes, excuse me. You can use any means necessary to get these filled out. Basically, you need to go through and fill in the blanks here for the first 10 amendments to the Constitution. And then there are some terms in the Bill of Rights that you may not be familiar with. And if you're reading through them, we want to understand what some of these terms mean and what they are. So there are 8 of them here. I want you to put in kind of the definition of what those things are, but make sure that you're not just copying and pasting from some website from like Harvard, where you'd have no idea what the words mean. Put them in your own words, okay? The definitions for each of the following terms. Okay, focus in here. Here's how this is going to work. Again, as soon as you're done watching this, you can't go to this right now because it's not posted yet. As soon as you are done watching this, you can go to the classwork in Google Classroom, find this, start working on it. When you are all done working on it, it's done and complete. The cheese is on the cheeseburger. You may then turn it in on Google Classroom. So step 1, finish the work. Step 2, turn it in on Google Classroom. Step 3, chat to me on Zoom that you are done and you have turned it in. Okay. Step 4, wait. Wait for me to then go check it in Google Classroom. Once I do that, I will look to see that it's done and complete, and then I will respond to you one of 2 things. 1, great job, you're all done, see ya. And you may then leave the Zoom meeting. Or if it's not done and complete, I will let you know what else you need to get done. Then you can go back, do it again, turn it back into me, let me know that it's done with the chat on Google, or excuse me, in the Zoom, and then I'll cut you loose. Okay? So this is like your exit ticket for today's class. Once you're done with it, again, chat me in Zoom, wait till I respond to you, and then I will let you leave. Capiche? Kaposh. Alrighty. Go ahead